rain had already swallowed the town before anyone realized they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered for generations. Everyone laughed at the old man. But the instant Elvis Presley climbed onto the roof of the abandoned Pearson's General Store, every voice disappeared. No one knew why the old man was trembling. No one knew why he kept staring at the roof as if it were a grave. And absolutely no one believed his final warning. If that roof comes down today, every soul standing here will regret it for the rest of their lives. The workers burst into laughter. Construction supervisors exchanged amused looks. Teenagers recorded the scene, expecting another harmless argument from a lonely old man who had spent too many years trapped inside memories. Even the heavy excavators seemed impatient, their engines rumbling beneath the gray sky as rainwater rolled down their steel arms. Only one person didn't laugh. Elvis Presley. He stood quietly beneath a black umbrella, his famous leather boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. His dark coat was soaked by the relentless rain, but he barely noticed. His attention never left the old man's eyes. Over the years, Elvis had stood before hundreds of thousands of screaming fans. He had looked into faces filled with excitement, faces desperate for an autograph, faces filled with admiration. But this was different. This man wasn't searching for attention. He wasn't begging. He wasn't performing. His eyes carried something Elvis had only seen a handful of times in his entire life. The unbearable weight of unfinished grief. A pain so old it had become part of the man's soul. The old man's shaking fingers slowly reached toward the building. "You still have time." His voice barely rose above the rain. "Please, don't let them destroy it." One of the contractors folded his arms. "We've inspected every inch of this place. The structure is collapsing. It can't be saved." The crowd nodded. Someone shouted sarcastically, "Maybe there's buried treasure under the roof." Another laughed. "Or maybe ghosts." Laughter echoed across the muddy street. The old man lowered his head. He had heard those same laughs for decades. Every year they grew louder. Every year fewer people believed him. Every year another piece of his memories disappeared beneath time. Elvis slowly stepped closer. "What exactly are you trying to protect?" For several seconds, the old man couldn't answer. His lips trembled. Rain mixed with tears running across the deep wrinkles of his face. Finally, he whispered, "I'm trying to protect a promise." Those words settled over the crowd like thunder. Nobody laughed anymore. Elvis looked toward the abandoned building. Pearson's General Store had once been the heart of the town. Old photographs showed children buying candy there after school. Families gathered outside every Saturday. Travelers stopped for coffee before continuing down the highway. Its wooden porch had once echoed with music. Its windows had reflected dreams. Now, every board was rotten, every window shattered. The faded sign barely clung to the wall. Nature had begun reclaiming what people had abandoned years ago. To everyone else, it was simply another forgotten building. To the old man, it was something entirely different. Elvis removed his gloves. The cold immediately bit into his hands. Without another word, he walked toward an old wooden ladder leaning beside the demolition equipment. A construction worker quickly stepped forward. "Sir, that's dangerous. The roof won't hold your weight." Another added, "We'll check it after demolition." The old man suddenly raised his voice. "No!" The sound startled everyone. If you destroy the roof first, it'll be gone forever." Silence returned. The rain became heavier. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains. Elvis slowly lifted the ladder. The wood creaked beneath his hands. He leaned it carefully against the side of the building. One rung, then another, then another. The higher he climbed, the quieter the crowd became. No one reached for their phones anymore. Nobody spoke. Even the workers removed their hard hats, watching with growing unease. The old roof groaned beneath every movement. Water dripped through cracked shingles. Loose nails poked from warped boards. One wrong step, and everything could collapse. Halfway across the roof, Elvis paused. Wind whipped against his coat. Rain blurred his vision. He knelt carefully and examined the ancient wooden planks. Nothing. Just rotten timber. The contractor below folded his arms again. "I told you." "There's nothing up there," another worker shouted. "Come back down before someone gets hurt." But Elvis wasn't listening. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Hidden. He slowly continued toward the highest section of the roof. The old man watched without blinking. His hands were clasped together as though praying. Then it happened. A loud crack echoed across the rooftop. One of the support boards snapped beneath Elvis's right foot. The entire section gave way. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several women screamed. Workers rushed toward the ladder. For one terrifying heartbeat, it looked as though Elvis would disappear into the collapsing roof. But instinct moved faster than fear. His left arm shot forward. His fingers caught an exposed beam hidden beneath the broken boards. Dust exploded into the rain. Splintered wood crashed into the darkness below. Elvis hung there, suspended between the storm above and the forgotten past beneath him. His breathing became slow, controlled. His boots searched carefully for stable footing. Then, his fingertips brushed against something cold. Not wood, not stone. Metal. He frowned. Carefully, very carefully, he reached deeper into the narrow opening. The object was coated with decades of dirt. Rust scratched against his skin. It was tied to an old leather strap that nearly crumbled in his hands. The crowd watched without making a sound. The old man's eyes widened. His breathing stopped. Elvis slowly pulled the object into the light. Rain washed years of dust away. A tiny bronze bell appeared in his hands. Old, rusted, almost forgotten by time itself. The old man suddenly fell to his knees. His voice cracked into a whisper that barely escaped his lips. "There it is. After all these years. There it is." No one understood. The contractors exchanged confused glances. Children looked at one another. Some expected an explanation. Others believed the old man had finally lost himself completely. Elvis turned the tiny bell over in his hands. Despite the rust, tiny carved letters were still visible. Not a company name, not a date. Just two simple words. "Come home." The wind stopped, almost unnaturally. Rain softened into a gentle whisper. The old man slowly lifted his tear-filled eyes toward Elvis. His lips trembled, as though speaking required every ounce of strength left inside him. Then, with a voice that carried more hope than sorrow, He uttered only 2 words. "Ring it." Elvis looked down at the weathered bell, at the cracked handle, at the faded engraving. Then he slowly wrapped his fingers around it. The entire town held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The storm itself seemed to be waiting. Elvis gently lifted the little bell and gave it the smallest shake. The soft chime disappeared into the rain. For one long moment, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere behind the abandoned Pearson's General Store, hidden beneath decades of overgrown grass, came the sound of slow footsteps. Not human. Something else. Something that had been waiting far longer than anyone could possibly imagine. The tiny bronze bell swayed gently in Elvis Presley's hand. Its delicate chime drifted through the rain, soft, fragile, almost too quiet to hear. For one long heartbeat, nothing happened. The crowd exchanged uncertain glances. A construction worker let out a nervous laugh. "That's it?" Another shrugged. "It was just an old bell." Someone in the back of the crowd muttered that the old man had wasted everyone's time. The excavator's engine rumbled to life again. Its steel bucket slowly lifted into the air. The demolition supervisor raised one hand. "Prepare to begin." But before his hand could fall, a sound echoed from behind the abandoned Pearson's General Store. Not loud, not frightening, just slow footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Every head turned toward the overgrown field behind the building. Tall weeds swayed, although the wind had almost disappeared. Something was moving through them. The workers frowned. Children instinctively stepped closer to their parents. Even the machines seemed insignificant against the strange silence that had settled over the town. Then, a tired white muzzle appeared between the wet grass. It was followed by cloudy blue eyes, then trembling legs. An impossibly old white dog slowly emerged from the weeds. Its fur, once bright as snow, had faded into shades of silver. Mud clung to its paws. Rain soaked every strand of its coat. Its body was thin, its movements slow. But there was something noble in the way it carried itself. The dog didn't bark. It didn't hesitate. It simply kept walking, straight toward the old man. The crowd instinctively moved aside, creating a narrow path. Nobody dared interrupt it. Nobody even whispered. The old man collapsed onto his knees before the dog reached him. His weathered hands shook violently. "No." His voice cracked beneath decades of buried sorrow. "It can't be." The old dog stopped only inches away. For several seconds, it simply stared into the old man's eyes, as though searching for someone it had loved long ago. Then, very gently, it lowered its tired head onto the old man's knee. The old man's body trembled. A broken sob escaped his chest. He wrapped both arms around the frail animal and buried his face in its wet fur. The years disappeared. The wrinkles disappeared. For one impossible moment, he was simply a father holding on to the last living piece of his son. The crowd watched in complete silence. More than one person quietly wiped away tears they hadn't expected to shed. Even the construction workers lowered their heads. One young laborer removed his hard hat and clutched it tightly against his chest. Nobody laughed anymore. Elvis slowly climbed down from the roof. His boots touched the muddy ground without making a sound. Still holding the small bronze bell, he walked toward the old man. He knelt beside him. The old dog slowly lifted its tired eyes toward Elvis. There was no fear inside them, only peace. As if the animal somehow understood why this day had finally arrived. Elvis spoke softly. "Who is he?" The old man closed his eyes. His fingers gently stroked the dog's silver fur. For several moments, he couldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than the rain itself. "His name is Hope." The name spread quietly through the crowd. Hope. Several older townspeople exchanged startled looks. One elderly woman suddenly covered her mouth. "I remember," she whispered. "My father used to talk about a white dog." Another man nodded slowly. "I thought it was only a story." The old man smiled sadly. "No, it was never a story." He looked toward the ruined store. His eyes no longer saw broken wood. He saw another day, another storm, another life. It happened 30 years ago. The rain continued falling as though the sky itself wanted to hear the story. "My son." He was only 12 years old. The crowd listened without breathing. He loved climbing. He believed every roof hid another adventure. A faint smile crossed the old man's face before fading again. "That summer we repaired this very building together. It wasn't much, but it was ours." He looked at the bronze bell still resting in Elvis's hand. That bell belonged to him. He begged me to hang it beneath the roof. I laughed and asked him why anyone would put a bell up there. The old man's lips trembled. He looked at me and said, "If I ever need help, all I have to do is ring it." The crowd remained frozen. My wife thought it was a silly idea, but I let him do it. The old man gently held the dog's face between his hands. And Hope? He never left my son's side. If my boy walked, Hope followed. If he laughed, Hope wagged his tail. If he cried, Hope cried beside him. They grew up together, like brothers. The old man's breathing became uneven. Then came the storm. His words grew slower. He was replacing loose shingles. I was inside counting supplies. The wind became stronger. I shouted for him to come down, but he smiled and said he only had one board left. The old man's hands began shaking uncontrollably. Then I heard the wood break. Several people quietly looked toward the damaged roof. I ran outside. My son had fallen. He couldn't move. I screamed for help, but the nearest town was miles away. There were no telephones here, no ambulances, no one close enough to hear us. The old man's eyes filled with tears once again. I thought I was about to lose him. He looked lovingly at the old dog, but Hope didn't panic. He looked at my son, then at the roof. Then he ran, faster than I'd ever seen him run. The old man pointed toward the bronze bell. He climbed onto the broken porch, jumped onto a stack of barrels, reached the edge of the roof, And somehow, he rang the bell. The crowd stared at the tiny object in Elvis's hand. The sound echoed across the valley. Farmers heard it. Railroad workers heard it. A passing doctor heard it. People came running from every direction, dozens of them. They lifted the broken beams. They carried my son to safety. The doctor told me, if help had arrived even a few minutes later, my little boy would have died. The old man's tears fell freely now. So everyone called Hope a hero. The whole town celebrated him. They said no dog had ever saved a child's life in such an extraordinary way. A little girl standing near the front smiled through her tears as she looked at the old white dog. But, the old man's voice almost disappeared, life isn't always kind. The smile vanished from every face. My son survived the fall. He walked again. He laughed again. We believed the worst was behind us. The old man looked toward the gray sky. We were wrong. His voice broke completely. Only a few months later, the doctors discovered something they could never fix. He became weaker every day. Hope never left his bedside. He refused food. He refused sleep. If my son opened his eyes, hope was there. If he reached out his hand, hope placed his head beneath it. Then, one cold autumn morning, my little boy smiled at Hope one last time, held his ears, and whispered, "Wait for me." The old man's shoulders collapsed beneath the weight of the memory. Those were the last words he ever spoke. Silence consumed the town. Even the rain seemed quieter now. The old man looked down at the elderly dog resting against him. From that day on, Hope came back here. Every single morning. He sat beneath this roof. He waited. He listened. He believed that one day the bell would ring again. The old man slowly looked up at Elvis. His tear-filled eyes carried no anger, only gratitude. I tried to take him home. He always returned. People said he was confused. They said he was too old to remember. They laughed when I told them why he stayed. He gently stroked Hope's silver fur. But he wasn't waiting for death. He wasn't waiting for food. He wasn't waiting for me. The old man's voice softened into almost a whisper. He was keeping the promise my son asked him to keep. Wait for me. And for 30 years, he never stopped waiting. Elvis looked down at the little bronze bell still resting in his hand. For the first time that day, he understood. The bell had never been the miracle. The miracle had always been the heart that refused to give up. And as every person standing in the rain silently wiped away tears, none of them noticed that Hope, after hearing the bell one final time, slowly closed his tired eyes, and without fear, released the last breath of a life built entirely on love, loyalty, and a promise that had finally been fulfilled. For several long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The rain continued to fall in gentle sheets across the abandoned Pearson's General Store, but somehow it no longer felt cold. It felt as though the sky itself had chosen to mourn. Hope lay peacefully in the old man's arms. His tired body was completely still. The years of waiting, the lonely mornings, the endless afternoons beneath the broken roof, the freezing winters, the scorching summers, they had all come to an end with the sound of one tiny bronze bell. The old man rested his forehead against the faithful dog's head. He didn't cry loudly. His grief was far too deep for tears alone. Instead, a quiet smile slowly appeared across his weathered face. "It was worth it," he whispered. "You kept your promise." The words drifted through the silence like a prayer. Elvis stood only a few steps away, still holding the little bronze bell in his hands. Its rust-covered surface glistened beneath the rain. He stared at it for a long time. Not because it was valuable, not because it was rare, but because he had suddenly realized something that fame had never taught him. A person's greatest legacy is not measured by applause, or by money, or by how many people know their name. It is measured by the promises they keep, especially when nobody is watching. Elvis slowly walked toward the old man. Without saying a word, he knelt beside him. Then, with both hands, he carefully placed the little bronze bell into the old man's trembling palms. "It belongs with your family." The old man looked up. Fresh tears rolled down his cheeks. "I thought everyone had forgotten." Elvis gently shook his head. "No. They simply never knew the story." The crowd stood in complete silence. Many people who had laughed only an hour earlier now lowered their heads in shame. The construction supervisor slowly removed his helmet. He walked toward the old man until only a few feet separated them. His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry. I laughed at you. I thought you were trying to stop progress. I never imagined you were protecting someone's memory." The old man smiled kindly. "You couldn't have known." One by one, the construction workers stepped forward. None of them spoke. They simply placed their helmets over their hearts as a sign of respect. Even the young men who had mocked the old man wiped tears from their faces. One teenager quietly stopped recording with his camera. For the first time in his life, he understood that not every moment needed to be posted. Some moments deserved only silence. The demolition foreman looked toward the excavator, then toward the ruined store. Finally, he turned off the engine. The deep rumble disappeared. The entire town became unbelievably quiet. Every eye turned toward Elvis. No speeches were expected, no performance, no song, just one decision. Elvis slowly walked across the muddy ground toward the demolition contract lying on the hood of a pickup truck. Rain soaked the papers almost immediately. He picked up the pen, read every page, then quietly folded the contract in half, again and again. Without hesitation, he tore it into pieces. The paper scattered into the wind like white leaves. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence meant far more than applause ever could. Elvis looked at the construction supervisor. "This building isn't coming down." The man nodded without arguing. "It won't." Word spread through the town before sunset. By the next morning, something extraordinary had begun. A local carpenter arrived, carrying his father's old toolbox. "I'll repair the porch." An electrician drove in from the next county. "I'll restore the lights." A retired painter appeared with worn brushes. "I'll repaint every wall." Children showed up, carrying buckets. Teachers organized volunteers. Veterans repaired broken windows. Farmers donated lumber. A bakery delivered fresh bread every morning to everyone working on the project. Nobody asked for money. Nobody asked who was in charge. They simply worked. Together. Week after week, the forgotten Pearson's General Store slowly came back to life. The faded wooden sign was restored by hand. The old porch was rebuilt exactly as it had looked decades earlier. Inside, dusty shelves became small exhibits filled with photographs donated by families throughout the town. There were smiling children, old receipts, handwritten letters, rusted tools, family recipes, newspaper clippings. And in the center of the largest wall, a single framed photograph. A young boy laughing beside a beautiful white dog. Below it, the tiny bronze bell rested inside a glass case. Its engraving had been carefully cleaned. The words could finally be read clearly. "Come home." Months later, people traveled from across the country to visit the little store. Many arrived because they had heard Elvis Presley had saved a historic building. But they always left talking about someone else. Hope. Outside the entrance, a life-sized bronze statue was unveiled. Not of Elvis, not of the old man, but of the faithful white dog sitting patiently beneath the roof, his eyes fixed toward the horizon, as though still waiting for the voice he loved most. The inscription beneath the statue read, "Some hearts never stop waiting, because love never stops believing." When the cloth covering the statue was lifted, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. The old man stood beside Elvis, holding the bronze bell close to his chest. "This is the first day," he whispered, "that I don't feel alone." Elvis smiled gently. "You never were." The old man looked around. Families filled the street. Children laughed on the restored porch. Neighbors embraced one another. People who had once been strangers now shared stories as if they had known each other for years. One faithful dog, one forgotten promise, had reunited an entire town. A little girl tugged on Elvis's sleeve. "Mr. Presley?" "Do you think Hope knew today would come?" Elvis looked toward the bronze statue. A warm breeze drifted through the trees, causing the restored bell above the porch to ring softly on its own. Its gentle chime echoed across the street. Elvis smiled. "I don't think Hope was waiting for this day." The little girl tilted her head. "He was waiting for someone to remember." Years passed. The old man eventually joined his son. But before he did, he visited the store every single morning. He would sit beneath the porch, smile at Hope's statue, touch the glass protecting the little bronze bell, and quietly say, "I came back." After he was gone, the townspeople continued the tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of the bell's final ring, children gathered outside the old store. No speeches were given, no music played. Instead, one child was chosen to ring the bell exactly once. After the sound faded, the entire town observed 1 minute of silence. Not for sadness, but for gratitude. Parents would kneel beside their children and tell them about the little white dog who waited for 30 years because he believed love always finds its way home. And every child left with the same lesson. Fame may inspire people. Success may impress people. Power may change people. But loyalty? Loyalty changes generations. Long after Elvis's songs had echoed through history, long after newspapers stopped writing about that rainy afternoon, long after everyone who had witnessed the miracle was gone, the little bronze bell still rang above Pearson's general store whenever the wind blew. Visitors often smiled when they heard it. Some said it sounded ordinary, others said it sounded beautiful. But the people who knew the story always smiled through tears, because they understood something the rest of the world often forgets. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not performed by the most famous person in the room. Sometimes it is created by the quiet heart that refuses to break a promise. And somewhere beyond time, a little boy was finally running again. A faithful white dog raced beside him. Neither of them would ever have to wait again.